We're so fortunate to have so many loyal friends of the school, and many years ago, a donation was made that enabled us to host a Wilkinson poet every year. Poetry, like the gift of spring, is an eternal force that has always been there. But honoring the work that it takes to be a poet and the wonder of that accomplishment is remarkable for a school like Sam. It's my privilege this afternoon to introduce Ansie Baird, our poet in residence, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We just were reminded that the Wilkinson family gave a very generous gift, and in 1986, so this is the 26th reading we've had on Wilkinson readers, poets. And in following the reading, there is, as usual, a reception in Upper Westchester where you may have the chance to ask questions of the poet and have a couple of cookies, and I hope you'll join us at least for a minute or whatever you can manage. We are delighted to have as our honored guest today Sam Magavern, a local public interest lawyer and a teacher at UB Law School, who also contributed mightily to the decency of various Buffalo organizations and commissions. He's written books, published poems, and perhaps most significantly, fathered two outstanding daughters, the elder of whom, Anna, is a senior at the Buffalo Seminary. Sam is a man whose poems concern themselves with angels as though they are his buddies. He writes about farm animals, mules and pigs, for instance, as though they inhabit his backyard. He knows loons, he knows bullfrogs, he knows pumpkins and potatoes and blackberries. He knows myths and the Old Testament. Love is a supermarket, an office building, a leaky boat. We are blessed with Sam Magavern's presence here. We might all feel from time to time like dry, unleavened crackers. But right now, we are about to be slathered in honey. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ansie. I'm sure that I will never have a nicer introduction so long as I live. So thank you very much for that. And it's such an honor to be here, but also really a very great pleasure to get to read in a place that means so much to me for so many reasons, as Sam does. So I'm really just delighted. And so I'm trying something new today, which I've never done before, which is PowerPoint with poetry. So we'll see how it goes. If all else fails, don't worry, we'll just shut it down and do it old-fashioned style. But so the title of the reading is Blackberries, and that's an image by my wife, Monica Engel, that is part of the book that we produced last year called Noah's Ark. I'll start with a poem called The Great Northern Loon. And the reason I'm putting them up is partly because I like for you to be able to see the shape of the poems and to see where the lines end and where the stanzas are. The look of the poem on the page is very important to me, so I wanted to be able to share that. And then I have a couple of images to show you throughout the thing as well. And if all goes well, a little bit of a song to play for you too. But this one is The Great Northern Loon. I wanted to start with a bird. I'm going to end with a bird. And the poem is about, loons are very unusual animals. They have a very beautiful, weird song that you might have heard. And then the way they take off, it takes them like the whole length of the lake to get airborne. And you feel watching it like it's actually not going to happen. It's just going along, not getting out of the water. And you feel like it's never going to work. And then it does. It takes the loon so long to lift off from the lake. It flaps and slaps its big, awkward wings so violently. I start to think the whole bird is some kind of mistake. Then, at the last minute, it tears out gravity's iron escapes. So I've been writing poems since I was about 10 years old, And I'm not going to go quite that far back, but I am going to read you poems from when I was about 18 all the way until now, essentially. They're a little bit in order, but not completely. This one I wrote in my 20s, but since it's about childhood, it seemed like maybe it belonged in the beginning. It's the only word that I've ever invented is in this poem, and it's the word extratubular. And what it means is anything outside of your bathtub is extratubular. And it's called The Discovery of Atlantis. Will you ever get out of the bathtub? William Henry Bumberson, his mother, used to inquire. In a moment, sainted Mama, in just 1 millisecond, I'll be out. Only I'm just exploring an underwater empire of vast proportions, with a civilization so advanced, complex, and ultimately benevolent, that it makes the extratubular world look barbaric. The next poem, The Bullfrog's Prayer, it's a bit of a response to, in many religious traditions, there's sort of different strains and different strands, and often there's one strand that is about sort of renunciation and putting away the things of the world. And so in this poem, which is certainly a strand I respect, but in this particular poem, I decided to kind of take the opposite point of view, which I identified with the bullfrog. So this is the bullfrog's prayer. May you never renounce all cravings. May you continue to concern yourself with the difference between plum and magenta shades of lipstick. Listen to the bullfrog in the cold marsh, the frail bellows of his desired croak. May you never renounce his song. Now, this next poem I really did write when I was 18, and I think I was a little bit inspired by a song that I liked at the time by a guy named Jonathan Richman, who's still around, and he wrote a song called Government Center, which was about an office complex, just an ugly, completely boring office complex in Boston, and he made it sound very sort of fun and exciting. And so I think I was trying to do a bit of the same thing. I was trying to take the sort of most bland, boring thing I could possibly imagine, which was an office building, and find a little bit of mystery and romance in it by writing a love poem that compared someone to an office building. If you were an office building, I would spend my days dabbling in your elevators, roaming your corridors like Indian trails. I would learn the names of your maintenance men and watch them follow their wandering mouse. I would learn your fire regulations by heart, and I would lean out your windows and recite them. I could spend years in your hundreds of rooms. This one I also wrote when I was 18, and it's about Jonah and the whale. And Jonah, as you may recall, he spent 3 days in the whale. And I was just wondering what that was like. That's got to be a very unusual place to spend 3 days. And, you know, the Bible is wonderful because it leaves out so much information. So many of the Bible stories, when you go back and read them, you're shocked how short they are. And how much power they gain by leaving things out instead of putting them in. But it also leaves room for us to come along and add some more details. So that's what I did here. So Jonah God wanted him to go to Nineveh to prophesy, and he didn't want to go. And then he went on the boat, and God capsized the boat and had the whale swallow him. So this is what happened while he was in the whale. Jonah knocked about the whale as if in a strange hotel in a developing nation, kicking a flabby wall or two, stumbling over a minor organ, or taking his constitutional along the winding intestines, and finding it all quite dank, but orderly in a heaped-up way. No worse, really, than a hot tent, a swarm of flies, or a bad dream. He was at last free of the nagging. Go to Nineveh, free to pray and be punished, in the bowels of his own life. This one I wrote a little later in life, but the protagonist is an 11th grader. And so Dr. Zhivago is a very wonderful, beautiful novel by a poet, Boris Pasternak, from Russia. And it was made into a very romantic movie starring Omar Sharif as a doctor, the doctor who's also a poet. And it's really the most sort of dashing, handsome poet you can possibly imagine. So if you're a young person interested in poetry, you're very glad to see a very glamorous depiction of a poet on the big screen. And the co-star was Julie Christie. And that's probably all you need to know about this one. Except, well, I'll just tell you, I went to see, I was not in 11th grade when I saw Dr. Zhivago. I was a freshman in college, and I saw it over my winter break, and I went back and decided to major in Russian history and literature, which was not a very practical decision, but not one that I regret, because Russian history and literature is a wonderful, fascinating topic. Poetry can change the world in some appalling ways, but also for the better. N, the young poet, saw the movie Dr. Zhivago in 11th grade. What a good idea, he thought, to sit in the frozen stillness of Siberia, writing cycles of poetry, while Julie Christie sleeps under a bearskin in the next room. The very next day, he wrote the love poem, Dr. Zhivago. Its theme, a portrait of the lovesick artist who makes it through only the first chapter of the book, but finds his life changed by the movie. Actually, one of my best friends did write a poem called Dr. Zhivago, but I took a lot of poetic license. The rest of it's not really so true. So, as I was picking poems for today, I ended up with a kind of strong animal theme and farm theme. I don't write as many poems about farms as you might think from this reading. You're getting pretty much all the farm poems. But this one is about Old MacDonald, and you know he did have a farm, but the song doesn't tell you that much about the farm. And what I learned through some research is actually that it was a farm for vowels. The only other thing you need to know, since you're so young probably, is that DTs is what you get if you have an alcohol addiction. When you're deprived of the alcohol, you get the DTs. So, Old MacDonald's farm. Old MacDonald ran a farm for vowels. E-I-E-I-O. Poor O, so corpulent and solitary, gazing mournfully at the two eyes nuzzling, E's leaping and squealing. Maybe that's why Old MacDonald loved her best, the most darkly, when he crept bleary-eyed into the barn each day, hands trembling from DTs, to feed her crackly consonants. Now, I called this one Mr. Potato Head, but I was not thinking so much about the toy, the Mr. Potato Head toy. I was more just thinking about potatoes. And their life cycle, their life, which seemed, sort of amazing and miraculous, a little bit tragic, a little bit funny, the more I thought about it. And so, I wrote this poem, Mr. Potato Head. Mr. Potato Head grew up in the damp, stifling hug of the earth, nearly gasped out loud when yanked out, tossed into a bin with thousands of others. Sunlight was the harshest kind of miracle. The oblivion ended only when I plucked him out of the supermarket heap. Now I have anointed him with rich, fat butter. He seems radiantly his own. I will devour him. This is Old MacDonald's return appearance. Turns out he also farms chickens, not just vowels. Chicken life. The chickens were brutal. The chickens were scared. He never ever meant to, but Old MacDonald cared. One of the stories or characters that I again is King David. And it's partly because not only is he a king and, has all of these wonderful stories about him as king and before he got to be king, but also he is the one who wrote the Psalms, according to the Bible. So he's also a poet, a singer. He also dances in front of the ark, so he's a dancer as well. And Bathsheba is the woman that he fell in love with, and he actually arranged for her husband Uriah the Hittite to be killed at the front so that he could have Bathsheba to himself. That's sort of the darker part of the love affair. This poem is about the sunnier, maybe a little bit the sunnier part of it. But it's about art and love and their eternal contest with death. Bathsheba. What good is a psalm? A balm for the soul? It makes us whole. No, a psalm can't fill the holes loss makes, or heal the wounds with a merry tune. Yes, if you learn how to swoon, as David did, one Jerusalem June, in the calm of a Bathsheba afternoon. Well, enough about King David. Let's get back to the farm and the pigs. And what happens when pigs are feeling sad? What's tough is that they don't get to sort of put on airs and create drama the way we do when we're feeling sad. Their options are a lot more limited when they suffer from lassitude. Pigs also suffer from melancholia, but find it hard to cut the tragic figure. No cloaks, no cigarettes, just the same old mud and slop and the chapped hands of the farmer who tilts his grizzled head away so as not to meet the sad eyes. The bee's blessing. Blessed are the humble and good, though they often suffer on earth, and there is no hereafter, and in a few generations, even their names may be effaced. Yet they have turned some of this dust into honey. And this is one I especially wanted you to be able to see, so that you could see how I did my kind of E.E. Cummings thing of running the words together, which I can, do a little bit the way I read it, but not really the way it is in the poem as it's written. Wintertime with the bears. Wintertime, wintertime, all I want to do is eat, drink, and sleep. I would lie down with the bears if they allowed me, live off the fat of my dreams until spring wakes. This next poem it's a bit of an elegy for my late father-in-law, Dr. Bill Engel, who did have a great round head, like the sun, and who was extremely funny, like the person in the poem, and who was also very interested in geese. He was very interested in hunting them, but also very interested in learning about them and knowing everything about them. Like a lot of hunters, most hunters, I think, love the animals that they hunt, so they have a kind of complicated relationship with them, but a lot of respect for them usually. The geese honk your name. The sun has not forgotten you. It reminds me of you every morning when its great round head rises up from its pillow and warms me. The stars have not forgotten you. They prick at my pride and self-love each night, just like your bright wit. No, not even the silly geese have forgotten you, but they are fleeing from a cold winter that could not contain you, flying south and honking your name. The three blind mice. But the three blind mice, the heroes of this tale, wake up each day to chew through just a little more darkness, to nibble the veil that separates us from the glory. They know all about the farmer's wife. They've heard the cruel songs. But even while they're fleeing her, they say, time still tastes sweet in their tiny mouths. blueberry juice. I want to write a poem that I wouldn't be ashamed to read to a cow munching weeds in a sparse pasture, or tie to the leg of a squirrel before he races across phone wires. Then a haiku so seemingly natural, a frog might mistake it for a lily pad and use it for a seat. An ode written in blueberry juice with words so earthy that when I clutch it to my chest, the worms won't disdain to chew. So now I'm going to show you a picture of a singer, a blues gospel singer called Reverend Blind Gary Davis. And I'm going to read you a poem that I wrote called Samson Pull the Pillars Down, that I think, although my memory is a little hazy, but I think it was a little bit inspired by hearing his song about Samson and Delilah. And if I can figure out how to do it, I'm going to play you a quick clip of that song. So that's his song about Samson and Delilah. And I know it's hard to understand the words. So he's saying, if I had my way, I would pull this whole building down. So it's the part of Samson and Delilah after she cuts off his hair and takes away his strength. Then he's imprisoned by the Philistines. And he prays to God for strength to bring the temple crashing down and kill the Philistines and himself while he's at it. He's blinded at that point. The Philistines have blinded him. So this was an attempt to get a little bit of the feel of a blues song into a poem about Samson. Samson, pull the pillars down. Samson, pull the pillars down. Samson, pull the pillars down. Let there be darkness all around. I'm sick to death of this Philistine town. Samson, pull the pillars down. Their inky veins and coal black hearts tear the pillars down. They tore out my hair. Now I'm too tired to care if they or I or anyone is spared. I'm blind and cold, lost and old. Oh, I gave myself up to their lair. Samson, pull the pillars down. Let the darkness fall. Let darkness abound. Now this poem, one thing often I'll write the poem and then do the title after I've written the poem. And so often the title is a chance to actually take the poem in a slightly different direction or add another layer to it. So when I wrote this poem, I really wasn't thinking about weddings. I was just really writing a love poem. But then when I titled it, the idea of a wedding chant came to mind. And then since I wrote it, I'm very happy to say it's actually been read at 2 different weddings, so it became a wedding chant. But here's how it goes. Now we overlap like 2 porous circles. Part of me is you, part of you is me. My soul is not solely my own, not something that I own. I am not made of stone. I am more than the sum of my bones. We are all sunlight on loan. I am what you shine and you shone. It's a little hidden play on words at the very end because the word shine is related to the word for beautiful. So like in German, schöne. So the idea of ending with shown, du schön, sort of another way of saying you are beautiful, as well as du schön. Well, I feel it's been too long since we've had a farm poem. I think this is the first one I ever wrote about Farmer Brown, and since then I've gotten to know him quite well, actually. But again, I was really just looking for a title for a poem that I'd written, and for some reason Farmer Brown seemed like the right title at the time. The word durance in the poem just means really a long time, but obviously it's related to the word endurance, so it had a little bit of that flavor as well. I actually had to look it up after I wrote the poem to make sure that it meant what I thought it meant, and luckily it did. It's always sad when you find out it doesn't mean what you think it did, and you have to change it. Farmer Brown. The little chick peeps, old woman weeps, the cat still sleeps. Sparrows will cheep, death will reap, and we keep nothing forever. But in this durance, hold it close to your chest, the tiny, fragile egg, while on the wet rocks, across the icy stream, we leap. So I don't know if you've ever heard this notion that if you have enough monkeys and typewriters and enough time, eventually they'll produce Hamlet. But that's sort of a concept, I guess, that's been out there for many years. And that's what inspired this one, the Hamlet Project. Everyone understands by now that if you put enough monkeys and enough typewriters for enough time, eventually they'll produce Hamlet. The more interesting question, which I researched, is how, after typing that last period, they'll feel. Bobo and Rafa, I'm certain, won't even notice, grooming each other for ticks. Twinkie, I know, will strut and boast as if he were the new king. In fact, of all of them, I think only Bessie might get an inkling that they've made something as durable as steel and fragrant as wild geranium. Most of my poems, I would be hard-pressed to say that a particular poet influenced them. Usually the influences that you get sort of go underground and surface in different ways that you're not really even conscious of. But this one, when I read it, I can kind of tell two poets that I would not have written it, I don't think, if not for reading them for years and loving them. And one is Robert Frost, who you probably know, and especially a poem called The Pasture that's sort of at the beginning of his collected poems. Talks about going off to see the calf in the pasture. And then the other is a very different poet, Frank O'Hara. And the funny thing about Robert Frost and Frank O'Hara, I kind of want to make this like a multiple choice question, not a test. Which poet grew up on a farm in New England? Because Frank O'Hara was the most cosmopolitan city poet to ever live. He loved New York City, he wrote about New York City, he wrote poems on his lunch hour, working at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and he loved the ballet and the museums, and just the essence of the cosmopolitan city poet. But he actually grew up on a farm in New England. Robert Frost did live on a farm in New England, but he actually grew up in San Francisco, where you would think Frank O'Hara grew up. So anyway, they're the two poets who I think maybe influenced this one. Blackberries. Like a light snowfall in May, consciousness soon melts. Sad, but isn't consciousness overrated anyway? The blackberries ripen and drop. Blackberries endure. Here, another berry just fell right by our plodding feet. Let's rinse it off in the creek. It will be tart and sweet. This one is about listening to cardinals sing and watching them fly around in the winter. And birds, sing in the spring. It's part of mating. They don't sing in the winter, but the birds have different definitions of when spring comes. And the cardinal actually starts singing in February, so it kind of anticipates the spring. And so there's sort of a religious kind of flavor to the poem. It ends with amen, so I thought a rabbi would be appropriate. But then I just thought it was kind of funny that since a cardinal is a Catholic dignitary, that it would be Rabbi Cardinal, and put the two together. It's still February and only 11 degrees, but the cardinal has started to sing again. His bright trill pierces the morning quiet, like a needle with red thread, embroidering a white cloth with the word Amen. This is a poem. I was reading a book about Islam, and it talked about this amazing calligrapher from centuries ago, Omar Akhta, who made these miraculously small editions of the Quran. I can't remember if he made big ones too, or if I made that up, to be honest. I'm quite sure he did make really small ones. But I started from that and then kept going. Omar Akhta. He made a Quran so giant, only an elephant could bear it. Then, one so tiny, it fit on a signet ring. Next, he carved the holy letters onto a dark, massing cloud. When it rained the next day, the rice was heard to sing. So here's my favorite painting in the world, other than the ones by Monica. This one's by Rembrandt, and it's The Return of the Prodigal Son. And one of the things majoring in Russian history and literature did for me was got me to St. Petersburg for a semester. And this happens to hang in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, right across the river from where I went to school. So I used to walk over the bridge in the afternoon after class and go look at the Rembrandts, including this one. And so that's, the prodigal son went off and sowed his wild oats and got into a lot of trouble. And then he came back, and his father welcomed him joyously. And his older brother, which the fellow off to the right, was not so pleased because he'd been a good, dutiful son all those years and stayed home. And he didn't really understand why you have a big feast when the prodigal son comes home. But the prodigal son, he lived among pigs for a while. He ate among pigs. And you can see he comes back, he's one foot is bare. Rembrandt added the detail of making the father blind, or at least most people think the way he depicted the father, that he's blind. So, years ago when I was young, I got the idea of writing a poem about a sunset based on this picture where the sun, so a pun on the prodigal son, the sun would be the sun, and the night would be the father, and the older brother would be the moon. And I wrote the poem, and I was sort of happy with it, but not entirely. And I just held on to it, and 25 years later, last year or so, I made a new version of it, which is this, Rembrandt Sunset. It's been a long day, son. Time for you to sleep, to set behind the brown hills. You've been everywhere, roaming, lavishing your light on polished palaces, and on pigs rooting through piles of offal. The pale cratered moon greets you with faint disgust. But your aged father, night, blinded and forgiving, opens his dark arms. Well, this is a poem. I was just telling one of the classes, and by the way, I wanted to mention how much I enjoyed the 4 classes that I sat with. The questions were great, and the poetry that the students had written was wonderful as well. But I was telling one of the classes, at least, about this poem, that I had this idea for a poem about a pumpkin or a jack-o'-lantern, and I tried writing it many, many times, and I just was never happy with it. And part of the problem was the words pumpkin and jack-o'-lantern. They just carry a little too much Halloween with them in a way that didn't fit with what I wanted to do. And finally I got the idea of calling it a gourd, and that helped solve the problem of writing a poem about a jack-o'-lantern without ever using those words. Farmer Brown's gourd. One day, Farmer Brown drove up and cut the cord. Heaved me into the back of his pickup truck, jostled with the crowd. sold me off a folding table for a handful of greasy bills. A boy with stubby fingers sliced open my top, scooped out all my innards with a big metal spoon, then carved a hideous cartoon for my face. Set me on his stoop in the cold, loud night, frozen and exposed. But out of every orifice streams light. Now this is a picture of Orpheus getting torn apart by the Maenads. So Orpheus, the more famous story about him is how he lost his wife Eurydice to the underworld, and he traveled down into the underworld to rescue her. And Hades, the god of the underworld, said, yeah, well, you can bring her back up to life, but only if you don't look back at her. So, and then he looked back, and she vanished. But when he came back up, without her, he then went on to continue to sing songs and make poems until the god Dionysius had his Maenads, who were the women who worshipped him. He sent them into a frenzy, and they tore Orpheus apart, and they ripped his head off and threw it into a stream. But the myth says that he kept singing, his head kept singing when it floated down the stream. Orpheus the luminous. Tired of the blackness, tired of darkness, he sits alone on top of a scraggy, desolate hill, strumming his worn lyre and chanting hymns to the lovely daybreak. And when the crazy Maenads come and tear his head off and chuck it into the nearest stream to float down to the frothy sea, his lips still sing his odes and paeans, unperturbed and free. Okay, I think I'm in fairly good shape as far as time. A couple of years ago, I started writing these poems where I would pick a place that I didn't usually know much about, or just the name that sounded good to me, and then I would take a name and I would put the two together and see if I could make a poem out of them. And that's how I ended up writing a poem about a leisure park in Omsk, Russia, a place I've never been to and don't know anything about. And Kolya is a person who I just made up. But it turned out I had kind of strong feelings about how he should live his life once I made him up. Omsk Leisure Park. Kolya, don't move to Omsk. I don't care how much they offer you to run their leisure park. It's not worth it. Kolya, stop trying to sell people fun. Joy should spring up secretly, like mushrooms in dark, dank woods, not in this glare and glare. And this poem came from the same method, taking a place name and a person's name. So I really don't know someone named Frank, and I never actually have sat on a back porch in Salamanca. I just like the sound of those names and made a poem out of them. Salamanca. Every evening in Salamanca, we sit on the back porch as darkness falls and watch the shy deer slip between the silvery maple saplings and sip cool water from the pond. Why, Frank, did you yearn for a better world? Who needs a great beyond? This is another poem where the title came very much after the poem. So I was really just thinking about writing a poem about someone losing a friend. But after I wrote it and I was trying to think of a title, I thought about how in the Iliad, Achilles loses his lover or his friend Patroclus, and it seemed like a good title for it. I can't get over it. Can't build a rope bridge across the terrible gap that your death left. I can't build an ingenious huckleberry fin raft. Nothing floats on that void. I can't become a goat and saunter over with one great careless leap. It's too wide, my friend, too deep. Octopus. I'm soft as can be. My only hard part is my beak. I crawl on the ocean floor, trawling for clams and crabs. I have 3 hearts, and I can detach an arm if need be. 7 is enough. I'm the smartest of invertebrates. I think I can think. When I'm scared, like a poet, I eject thick black ink. So octopi really actually do have 3 hearts, and they really do have beaks, which I never knew until I was just sort of reading a bit about them and writing that poem. So here's some mules, and they're on the towpath of the Erie Canal. And I never understood why, you know the old song, I had no mule and your name was Sam. I never understood why there were mules on the Erie Canal until finally I read that they pulled the boats. So the boats on the Erie Canal, they weren't sailboats, they weren't motorboats, they were pulled by mules. So that's what the mules did. That's why in the song you had an old mule and your name was Sam. So that's the mules on the towpath next to the canal. So I was thinking about Sal and sort of more details about that story to create this poem, The Towpath. I had an old mule, her name was Sal. Many the frigid morning near Syracuse, I broke the ice on her pail. Then she'd nuzzle raw oats out of my numb hands. I've had 3 other mules since she died, but they're just brutes, trudging mindless in the ruts. Maybe I'm the one to blame, but I can't even bear to give the things names. Psyche. If the soul were just a self, then when I die, it would be done. An empty can gathering dust on a shelf. Luckily, it is made out of wind, and however diffused, still of use, escaping someone's mouth in a hum or whistle, wafting bits of pollen from stamen to pistil. This is a poem about bats, and like most people, I find bats a little scary and repellent and disgusting. So I was kind of especially interested in the idea of trying to write a poem that found beauty in the life of bats. So this was my attempt to do that, I think. The Twilight Singers. We live inside a large, dark cave. We crave tiny, glittering things. We sing to locate ourselves. We hang upside down and dream. Daylight is too glaring, and night too grave, but twilight saves. After the carnival is over, and the camels were sent back, and the litter still remains. The prize pig has been slaughtered. Spangles from baton-twirling girls lie like stars on the asphalt. It's no one's fault, but the Bulgarian strongman weeps because he can't lift my dreams. They cling to the ludicrous earth. So I just have 2 poems left, and they're a tribute to my mother, who taught here for many years and loved teaching here. Had a wonderful career here. And there she is, holding a 3-headed snake in a temple in Thailand where she and my father traveled. And the snake was sort of the sacred thing about this temple, was that they had this snake with 3 heads, and it had miraculous healing properties. I'm just going to tell you a very quick story about my mother. Many years ago, she had to have surgery, and she had to go under general anesthetic. And so the nurses told her, you're going to have wonderful dreams under anesthesia. So before we knock you out, think about a place where you really want to be. And so she thought about being out camping in the country in this beautiful spot overlooking a pond. And then she got the anesthesia, but she didn't actually dream about that. What she dreamed was that she was here, excuse me, teaching the Odyssey to her students. Excuse me. So that was, it shows you a bit of her love for the seminary, but also I love the fact that she identified with Odysseus, the great traveler and adventurer. And she thought teaching was a great adventure. The three-headed snake. In the photo, my mother holds a three-headed snake, miraculous healer from a temple near Songpa Lake. Look at her broad grin, her bright green dress. You too may receive a blessing, a remedy for dark laps and aches. Now, my mother's name was Robin, but to be honest, I was not thinking about her when I wrote this poem many years ago. I was really thinking about the bird, and this is the last poem in the book, Noah's Ark, and I was thinking, at least part of the reason I put it as the last poem is because when Noah's Ark lands, right before it lands, the dove flies up to the ark with an olive branch in its beak, and that's how they know they're close to land. And so I was thinking about sort of a bird having that sort of message. And of course, whenever you talk about birds in poems, you're also talking about poetry. So that's kind of what I was consciously thinking. And then after I wrote it and I read it, I thought, oh, well, it's also about my mother, because her name is Robin, and it's very true of her as well. So this is my last poem, The Robin's Way. How can you live? How can you live? The robin gets up while it is still dark to sing for us a path.